And we are live. Happy Monday. Happy first Monday of April, everyone out there. I'm hoping everyone watching on Facebook and LinkedIn can actually see the stream. This is the first time we've tried to do a multi-stream. Knowing my luck, it will just spectacularly fail. But if so, we will provide you with the playback. We are recording today. So fingers and toes. A little bit of a challenging topic today. I suppose we wanted to pull together a panel of experts, given the current climate, particularly within the talent acquisition sector, but across multiple sectors at the moment, where we're needing to, I guess, pull together and support each other. And today was really around providing that job seeker support and advice. I'm really lucky today to be joined by three of my favourite people. It's always such a pleasure to have join us, and such incredibly important people within the Rubberband community. So a huge thank you and welcome to Sandy Hutchison from Career Money Life, Sarah Donegan from Samuels Donegan, and Andrew Gemmell from Stresswell. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
Great to be here.
Excellent. Now, in terms of audience out there, we will be trying to provide some support and advice for three different, I guess, you could call it personas. So, we will be trying to provide some support for and advice for job seekers, for talent acquisition teams that are hiring, but also for hiring managers as well. So we do encourage you, any questions that you would like to direct to the panel or to any individuals, please pop them in the chat box if you're on LinkedIn. They'll come through and we'll try and answer as many as possible. We will probably be online today for about 45 minutes. We'll see how we go. But really excited to, to hopefully help as many of you as possible today. But yeah, back to the panel, our exciting panel. So we'll do a around the room introduction for those who haven't met, Sandy, Sarah, and Andrew. So Sandy, we'll start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and also, I guess, Career Money Life and what you do.
Fantastic. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here and talking about this important topic. Yes, I'm Sandy. I am founder and CEO of Career Money Life, and we're a platform that supports a whole range of employee experiences across the lifetime with an organization, right from helping people find jobs, transitioning out when they lose their jobs, and having great employee experiences along the way in terms of supporting their mental well-being, their career development, coaching, all those sorts of things. Prior to starting this business, I worked in HR consulting at Mercer as a partner there for many years, and worked as an HR director. So come from a long lineage in the people space. And that's really my passion, helping people.
Oh, wonderful. And such a wealth of knowledge, and such a great, Career Money Life is such a great business in terms of, the full suite of support that you provide people. So something that we're all very passionate about within Rubberband. So thank you for all your support. Yeah. And Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself and about Stresswell as well. You're doing such amazing work in the community.
Thanks, Eden. Yeah, nice initiative, by the way, running this too, because that's what it's all about, getting around and helping out other people. But yeah, I have come from the recruitment background, had a long history there. I'm still working in it part-time, and this is a passion project which is building out over time for me, and it's really focused on helping individuals and teams. And teams is probably more so with education, but it's across really how we manage our physiology and our psychophysiology and ultimately our well-being, and how we get the best from ourselves, particularly when we've been through COVID, and now we're moving into a new stage where we've got uncertainty from an economic point of view, and the way the world is at the moment, the amount of data we get fed, it's just continuous. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, and so it's really helping people explore, I guess, where are they at, what do they need to do, and helping them get there. Yeah,
wonderful. And I think both what Sandy has described and what you've described, that self-care and how important that is at the moment, and knowing that it's such a challenging time. I think even in addition to data, it's just we feel like every day there's more and more bad news that we're having to take on board. So it does feel like a really scary world out there, even outside of, from a professional perspective. It's just the world in general. It's been a really challenging few years for a lot of people. So services like what you're providing and support you're providing are so important and wonderful. So big thank you. And Says.
Hello, hi everyone.
Says today. There you go.
Hi. So I'm Sarah Donegan. So I'm a co-founder at Samuels Donegan. So we purely just focus on the HR recruitment market. So recruit obviously in-house TA roles, etc., as well as the broader HR market. So look, we're obviously at the coalface in terms of what's going on at the moment. So really just wanting to share my tips in terms of what's happening out there, because it is a bit like, what's going on? It's not all bad news at all. So it's definitely pockets of good news. So just wanted to kind of share some insights. And I'm sure not the only one that feels like this period feels like March 2020 before the pandemic. So who knows what we're about to go through. But yeah. So just hopefully give some advice and go, you know what? It's okay. It's only ever a point in time. We'll get through this. So just here to share some insights around what's happening and how to help people in their job search as well.
Oh, that's wonderful, Sarah. I think, one of the reasons why Samuels Donegan does have that amazing reputation in the, not just the HR market, but I suppose that's where you specialize. So, and why we all value the services you provide is because you do provide that level of care. You're not a transactional recruiter. It's, you're there to support and I think that's wonderful. So thank you for everything that you're doing too. It's going to be very valuable today.
Absolute pleasure.
We've kind of, at a high level, talked about, what's going on out there in the market. And I think we're all seeing the posts on LinkedIn, and we're seeing things in the media, high inflation, and we're seeing a lot of our peers, particularly in talent acquisition, losing their roles in certain sectors. But and to your point, Sarah, it's not all sectors. So I'm keen to just go around the room and hear your opinions of what's happening in the market. So Sandy, what are you hearing and what are you seeing? What's happening in the Australian market at the moment?
Look, it is a strange market. It's really a tale of two cities. It is certain sectors you talk to and they're like, we just can't hire enough people. Like, as long as they're breathing, we'll hire them. We're not going to put any assessments in place. It's just like, we just get them in the door. And then, we're on the other side, we've got companies that are doing, large scale redundancy programs and, that difficult transition process is happening for people. And so it feels really, inconsistent, I guess would be the word. It is really depending on the sector and what's going on in that sector. And that's always a part of the reality of the job market. But I think it's just much more pronounced because we haven't, I don't think we've recovered from some of the overhiring or some of the shortages that happened in COVID. And so I think it's making it much more lumpy than it normally would be in terms of those natural kind of variations.
It's really interesting. People talk about this overhiring. Like, do you think that was in certain sectors? And what do you think the intention around the overhiring was, Sandy?
Look, it was largely in the tech sector, and I think it was largely driven by the vast amount of virtually free capital that was flowing into startups. And one of the measures of growth, particularly if you couldn't get a profit or revenue measure, was to measure growth by headcount. And, I think there was just, everyone went a little cray-cray and just overhired. And you see the numbers coming through in the tech sector now, like it's extraordinary. And how much money, time, and effort onboarding. I heard examples where people came into roles and there was no one to onboard them. There was no managers. They were all too busy. The people were just sitting around for months, got a job, but nothing to do. Like, that's not good for anyone.
Yeah. It was a really interesting. So, I mean, last year I was recruiting within the technology space, and I mean, everyone was hiring. So you're absolutely right. I mean, there were no candidates. It was, we were all competing for the same talent. And it feels like, from my perspective, that we're now in the situation where it's the complete opposite. Yeah, it's very interesting market. What do you think, Andrew? What are you seeing out there? What do you think is happening?
Yeah, look, from a wellbeing space, it's a very topical. So there's a lot going on in this space at the moment, because of coming right back to what Sandy's mentioned, these staff shortages, and what Sarah's mentioned. You can look at that two ways. You can look at it transactionally, well, we need to keep staff, which is not really the ideal way to look at it, or you can look at it as a human and say, well, we really need to look after our staff. The latter. And there will always be a bit of both, but whatever it may be, it's very topical. There's a degree of people doing it really well, and then there's a degree of wellbeing washing and box ticking and so on that goes on. But I think the main topic probably at the moment, 'cause 1st of April's rolled around now, the new code of practice for psychological hazard and safety has come into play in most states now. And whether people are prepared for that or not, I think it's a fantastic initiative. By the way, that's caught up with physical health and safety, and it'll really put the impetus on companies to say, right, we have to, look at ourselves closely here, and what's the environment we're providing, what's the leadership we're providing, what's the interaction we're I guess, and the environment we're developing for people that work here. It'll take time, but the regulatory stick has come out. And now you can get proactive and really look at it from a proactive point of view. So that layers up on the whole wellbeing space. And as we were talking about earlier before we came online, there's a website. So if there's anyone in there that's viewing this and within your responsibilities, or you want to pass it on, the government have released a website called peopleatwork.gov.au. And that'll really help you look at how do we approach this new legislation.
So, Andrew, at a high level, I know we've only got 45 minutes today, but what is the difference between pre-legislation? What do organisations, what is the risk? What do they need to do? What do they need to commit to? What are the big changes with this legislation coming in?
Yeah, so it wasn't really regulated. So occupational health and safety has always been there. Yeah. And you have safety inspectors come in from a physical perspective. So ensuring physical things are in place, signage, all those usual things. But this area of psychological safety wasn't really regulated. And so that's the top level. So in terms of professional indemnity, if something were to happen, and at this point in time, it will be about precedents, and that really has to But professional indemnity will cover legal costs, but it won't actually cover damages.
Right.
Interesting.
So if something does, and in time it will happen, and precedents is set, that's an unknown for companies. So there's an absolute risk there now. Reputational risk, financial risk, you name it, all of it. So that's the biggest challenge that's come about.
Excellent. And anyone who missed that link, I will pop it in the comment box after the on both Facebook and LinkedIn after the event today. Sarah, so you're in the forefront of it. You're recruiting, you're hiring, and you're speaking to organisations who are looking to hire. What's happening out there?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and actually tapping into exactly what Sandy and Andrew had mentioned. So, echoing that piece with you, Sandy, you're absolutely right. For every client that we talk to that is, absolutely cannot find enough people, just hiring just like crazy, there's someone else we're talking to who are literally letting go, 10 or 20% of their workforce. So it is really kind of sector dependent, as I tend to call it. So, it's really kind of, and it's still the flow on from the pandemic. There's still a lot of things, thrown into that, a lot of skills shortages, etc., particularly in those sort of, the caring economy, in healthcare, aged care, that type of thing, retail potentially. But yeah, tech, and spot on, Sandy, it's a lot of that marker for tech companies is headcount, and they will hire, and they did hire massively. And unfortunately, we're seeing the repercussions of that now. The growth just didn't eventuate. The psychological safety is a really interesting one, and particularly for this audience, because, we recruit HR professionals and TA professionals, and the reality is there's more and more and more coming onto the HR, person. They're having to, the recent, obviously legislation changes. There's just constantly more stuff coming down the line. So, we talk to HR people every day of the week, and they are, I feel like every day in HR since, March 2020 has just been literally, through the rigmarole. So it's actually really stressful for HR because they're the ones coaching the business to do all these things. And of course, the business doesn't want to know about all these new regulations and things like that. They just want to get on with their job. So poor old HR and TA as well. I feel for them, to be honestly, because they're kind of the ones that are at the coalface and they're like, well, what's for us? So, we do hear that a lot. So that's actually, the stuff that you're tapping into, absolutely, Andrew and Sandy. It's just really important that HR, and including TA in that, is just like, just make sure you're okay, because whether you're hiring massively or you're making people redundant, it's stressful for HR both ways. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So, but certainly, we're getting probably a lot of burnout, definitely getting a bit of burnout. And I think, we've come off the rigmarole of pandemic, and all of a sudden we've just, some companies are just like full on, like, you know what I mean? So I think everyone, and all the global stuff that's going on at the moment. And I think a lot of people are just tired and exhausted. And then you overlay the stress of potential, softening in the market. It is a bit tricky at the moment, for sure.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think, it's so true about HR. I think, we're notorious for it. We're incredibly, we get into this industry because we either care about, finding people jobs, or we care about people and we want to support people in their careers, in their lives. We don't look after ourselves, and no one ever asks us how we're doing. So
true.
Absolutely right. We put this energy into caring for everyone else, and we take all of that emotion on. But unfortunately, we don't care about ourselves enough. So I'll just put that out there for everyone. Look after yourself.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I used to say that working in HR was, how in your kitchen, most of your cupboards are all really beautiful and neat, but then everyone has that one drawer with the sticky notes and and that's HR. It's like in an organization, we don't know where it fits. Shove it in the HR drawer.
It's true. It's absolutely true.
So true, Sandy. Oh God, that's a worry.
Well, look, I want to start now really in terms of all of that's going on. So, let's face it, it's an emotional roller coaster for everyone at the moment, whether you're hiring, whether you're in the situation where you're having to make positions redundant that are going to impact people in your organization, or whether you're currently not employed and looking for a role. Is very challenging at the moment. So I want to go around the room and just provide some advice for job seekers. So anyone, you don't, and not necessarily, doesn't have to be talent acquisition or HR people looking for roles. I think job seekers more broadly, what advice would you give them in this current climate, Sandy? If you're a job seeker, what do you do? It's overwhelming currently, clearly. What advice would you give?
Look, a few things. The first thing I would say is to be kind to yourself and take care of yourself, because it's really stressful, and particularly at the moment it's hard with the economic environment too. I think that's causing people even more concern. Being out of a job at a time when cost of living is increasing isn't great. In terms of some of the tactical things you could do, firstly, re-engage your network. I think we've all kind of retreated during COVID, and a lot of those connections where we would have just run into people or seen them at the coffee shop in the lobby, and all of those things that just don't seem to happen as much. We all know so many of the opportunities come from the network. So make a deliberate effort to reconnect with people. But it's always tricky doing that when you're in a position of looking for a job. So for those of you that aren't looking for a job, I would say make sure you're connecting with your network now. But asking people for a favor, asking people to help you, people are happy to do that. So you have to kind of be comfortable with that vulnerability of asking for help, which again, a lot of people don't want to do. And just making sure you've got all your assets ready. So, your resume and your LinkedIn's as best it can be. It's a really powerful tool. Sometimes we kind of do a bit of set and forget on those things. Your interview prep. I was talking to a recruiter the other day, and they were saying how, the people came in and that they just didn't connect in terms of their story. to the company, and it was the why piece. And we always say that, start with your why. What's your passion? Why do you want to work for this company? And not because, oh, my friend told me you have good benefits, or, it's like really work that stuff through and practice, find someone to practice with, and be polished and be prepared, because if you're in a sector that's a really competitive market right now, there is a lot of competition. So, you've got to put your best foot forward. And you'll probably talk at the end, but we partnered with Rubberband to offer our candidate care platform, which has fantastic tools, resources, interview prep, all for people that are part of this community for free. So if you're needing some help, go and have a look there. And there's lots of great stuff.
100%. And I was just going to say the same, Sandy. I think everything that you're talking about in terms of getting yourself prepared, getting all your assets ready. I know for one, and Sarah, you'll know this because I sent it to you not long ago, writing a CV is incredibly difficult when you've been on the other side of the fence, because you are so highly critical of yourself because you're so used to looking at other CVs. So it's like, oh my gosh, I'm making all the mistakes that I tell people they shouldn't. So, if you are out there in the market, as Sandy said, it is free. Jump on rubberband.com.au. Click on job seeker support, and even things like helping you get your resume built. And it's very, very simple and very handy. So that is a free. And thank you very much to Sandy and Career Money Life for donating that to Rubberband.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear some feedback from you as well. And we'll it'll continue to evolve and grow. But any support that you need. So I might move on to really valid points there, and I might move on to Andrew, I suppose, from an emotive perspective for job seekers at the moment. What advice would you give? What can people do right now that perhaps are not feeling amazing for obvious reasons?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, it's never a nice time. But I guess on the flip side of that, and people will take this with a grain of salt, but if you have the perspective that this is an opportunity as well, it potentially, we never know what can come from situations that we're out of our control. But I'll talk a little bit now about the things we can control, but there can be opportunity that comes from it. And hopefully we look back on it and go, actually, this has worked out really well, which I've done in the past and other people I know have done in the past. So, choosing our perspective. But I would bring it back to personally, and this is more around self-care. My philosophy and take on well-being is really giving our body what it needs, what it wants. And that goes right 250,000 years evolution, how we're designed, which is pretty amazing. So it's simple things. We may not have had time to exercise just because we were working, and we get sidetracked and distracted by everything else that comes into our life now. So exercise, socialization is super important. Making an effort to actually do it now that we're out of COVID. It's easy to turn on Netflix and watch it by yourself, but just go, okay, once a week I'm actually going to walk out the door and go and have a coffee with someone and actually do it. Yeah, getting into nature, getting out of the city, it's huge. There's lots of research behind it. Just opens the mind. Time to get back into hobbies. This might have been something else you've completely forgotten about. You go, right, okay, well, I've got time to do it. And that creativity, talking of Rubberband and creativity, but that creativity takes you out of the limbic emotional brain and puts you, right in that creative brain. So learning, another one, great opportunity to get back into learning and do things which perhaps are new and novel, because then really lift your mood. Again, we just subconsciously drift through life. This is an opportunity to actually re-engage with all these things. And then finally, I'd say just jump into a routine or a ritual each morning which will support some of these things for you and get the day off the right track.
I think it's absolutely right. I agree with everything that you're saying. And, we're sounding like kindred spirits here with creativity and nature and all the things that I'm really passionate about. It is so true. I mean, my partner's he's in one of the sectors that's incredibly busy at the moment. And, my sector's probably not so busy at the moment. So we've both got our own stresses going on for different reasons. But we did make that conscious effort yesterday to go for a walk. We've got a nature trail nearby. And I have to say, both of us feel amazing today. So getting yourself out there, just making that effort to do it. It may be like, oh, shivers, I'm going to lose half an hour if I do that. Is that going to make me more stressed? It won't. Just take that opportunity to do it. Just push yourself sometimes, because you will feel it later. You may not immediately, but these things do help. So I completely agree. Well,
there's lots of research behind it. Lots of research behind getting out.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a big one for me. And if you're not, I've got a belief that everyone does have creativity in them. But if you're someone that struggles to find that, jump on Instagram and look at other people's creativity. I think even getting your brain to see what other people are creating and TikTok videos and things like that. I know I find that really great for mindfulness when I see someone with their fast forward video and they're knitting a jumper and it's really amazing. Just getting yourself into that mind, I think is really wonderful.
Really good point.
Yeah, but there are so many of those, but we'll watch this space. We'll be sharing more of those, Andrew and I, through Rubberband. So watch this space. But Sarah, tell me, what advice would you give job seekers at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good point. And look, absolutely, self-care is really important. And often when I say to people, and it does depend on the level, because if you're quite senior and you're out of work, it can take 6 to 12 months. Like if people are earning over 200K, the reality is it's like, look, I always say the job search it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and you've got to pace yourself and everyone's different. Some people are like, oh, fabulous, I can't wait to have 6 months off. And other people are like, oh my God, I've got to work tomorrow. So, and unfortunately the market doesn't work to, your timeline. So the reality is, I always say to people, look, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Reach out to your networks 110%, Sandy, all the time. We always kind of, I know not everyone is a networker naturally, but we often, we won't engage until we need them. Do you know what I mean? And you kind of it's like friendships, you don't just tap into the friendship when you want them. You've kind of got to put the work in, down along the way. So, and it's just, because the reality is people that know what you're capable of are more than happy to advocate for you. In a competitive market, it's so much easier if someone can go, oh, wow, okay, I used to work with Sandy, 10 years ago. She's fantastic. I'm happy to put a good word in. And then people are happy to do that. And it's just, people, if they know what you're capable of, it helps set you apart from the competition. So just, those things, but also, Sandy, you're spot on. Look, and, in the last couple of years, literally if you had, I don't know, if you had a CV, you'd get hired. Like the reality is, it was, a very low barrier to entry in terms of the market in the last couple of years. And I think unfortunately some people have probably become a little bit lazy, a little bit slack in terms of their interview prep. And a lot of people, the feedback we're getting from clients is that they're just not answering the questions well, or they don't know their experience well enough, or they don't have good enough reasons. Do you know what I mean? And that why, you're so right. It's not just about, oh, these guys have great benefits and my friend works there. Or like, how do my skills actually, relate to this role, and what value am I going to add, and what is the problem that you guys are trying to solve, and how can I help? Do you know what I mean? So it's just getting really sharp and clear around those things. And I get it, people were hiring people on the spot in the last couple of years. No one had to try hard. No one had to put their best foot forward in terms of interviewing. And, I've been around long enough to see 3 recessions. So, this happens. This is life. You get one every 10 years. So you can't, I always, and I know it's hard for the younger generation that, this is like, whoa. I always thought I'd walk into a job. What life is like. Do you know what I mean? So you've got to be prepared for the ups and downs and get used to it. And that's why I say to people, I'm like, you always want to make sure you're getting, good experience, you're diversifying. And I know for the last couple of years, everyone's been like, I want to work in tech. And I always was really kind of, look, the best thing you can do in your career is get diverse experience. And I mean industry experience. Don't just work in one sector, because you can be guaranteed that sector won't be around forever. I used to do a lot of work in investment banking, automotive. Those sectors aren't around anymore. Do you know what I mean? So you've got to just constantly be thinking about those things. That's just something else I'd add into it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's, everyone thought that the technology world was the sexy space to work in and where you could do really cool things. But I've always found that's not necessarily the case. I think some of those tech firms can be the most conservative, where you perhaps don't have that opportunity to really stretch your capabilities or to advance your careers in different areas. I mean, I loved working in fin services. I've worked in higher ed. I have worked in consumer, and I've worked in tech, and I think that there's all different benefits. I think we do need to broaden our minds. It's about that, whether it's values alignment or the person that you'll be working with and how they're going to bring out the best in you, rather than the sector. I think we've got to really switch our minds off from saying, I want to work in technology, I want to work in fin services, I want to work in government. We've got to be more, open-minded, I feel.
You're spot on. And I always say at the end of the day, it's the leader. It's the person you report to and how great they are. And I get why tech is sexy and attractive. And look, they do pay well. Tech pays well. But as I always say, I'm like, well, would you rather have a sustainable job or a job that's super volatile and you're going to lose it in 6 months? So, it's a balance. But yes, I think, and because of the virtue of what HR and TA does, we're dealing with people. People are the same wherever you go. The reality is that they are the same. The problems, they're pretty similar, like slightly different, but pretty much just people issues. Awesome.
No, agreed, 100%. And look, that's a really good segue actually to the next question I wanted to ask, because the market is very different. We've talked about the candidate personas and perhaps some of the candidates are, that are applying for roles. It's very different to when they were 6 months ago or 12 months ago. So if you're a talent acquisition team or a talent acquisition professional or leader and you're actually working with those candidates, they've got environmental factors at play, they've got stresses at play, there's financial stresses out there. There's so much going on for these people, and they're no longer just the one person applying for the role as they might have been previously. They're 1 in 200, I'm hearing from some people when they're posting roles or more. What advice would you give? How do we work with these candidates in this current climate? What advice would you give to the TA teams? Sandy, what do you think?
I guess the first thing is a little bit of shift in mindset from thinking about jobs and job descriptions and thinking more about skills and skill sets. So, what skills does this individual bring? And could these skills be, repurposed to suit this job? And maybe there's not a perfect overlap, but, what are the really critical skills that we need for this role? And do they have those skills? And can we build that capability around them? If that person brings, some other experience, or they support our organization in different ways and they bring different things to the equation, rather than, just viewing it as purely we need an absolute match. I know we work with a program around migrant women that we're going to be talking more about, where we're supporting through a grant with RMIT and La Trobe, helping migrant women into work. And, that's a sector where you've got these really talented, capable people that really struggle through that process of maybe positioning themselves exactly the way it's needed to meet your requirements of a job description. But, for example, there was one recently that was a math teacher who had a master's in pure maths from Pakistan, can't work as a math teacher here, can't find a job. Like, that's a valuable analytic skill set in someone. How do we help that person, find a role, and how do talent acquisition people try to think differently? And then as we get into hiring managers, it's also, how do you get hiring managers to think differently about, could we take this person? What are they going to bring in terms of diversity, international mindset, all these other things? So I think it is really important to think differently now and to focus more on those skills, and particularly those future work skills, because you're not just hiring for now, you're hiring for the future.
Do you think it's difficult, or do you think there's a risk of talent teams losing sight of that? Because I'm very passionate about what you're doing in the space with migrant women as well. I'm very passionate about Talent Rise, for example, that help youth, disadvantaged youth, gain meaningful employment. With an abundance of candidates, how do we ensure that we don't lose sight of all that value that we're bringing into the organization? Because those people that we bring in, they add to our culture, and they bring so much more than necessarily just the skills. But we're also doing wonderful work for society. When we've got an abundance of candidates, how do we make sure we don't lose sight of that, in your opinion, Sandy?
Look, it's a tricky balance, but I think it's having a clear set of metrics. So, in terms of your recruiting metrics, they include those diversity measures, and they include, looking at, the pools that you're drawing from and the resources, because we know if you just continue to hire the same kinds of people from the same talent pools, you get the same. And what people need now is innovation and different. So it's being clear on your metrics, and that probably requires some brave conversations and maybe some pushback at times from hiring managers that say, just get me another one like that.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Andrew, what do you think in terms of, people working in recruitment that are doing the hiring, that are working with, candidates that are in a different situation than they were perhaps 12 months ago, 6 months ago? What advice would you give the TA teams?
Look, I think given how talent is getting skinnier and skinnier, and to access and really getting into an organisation, it's a really good playbook to actually go to the line now and really elevate that relationship, problem solving, looking at a complexity point of view. Because when there is enough resource that's going into the funnel and you're placing jobs, there's no real, desperation to change it at all. Now it's probably getting to the point where there's an opportunity, and asking different questions, being curious about, what pieces of the puzzle could we move differently here? Why can't we do that? Why can we? What could we do? Have you thought of this? Because this is what's happening in the market, and I guess it's an opportunity to start to mature the relationship. It's an opportunity to start maturing how you approach TA, and then you're moving into things which I think are good for talent acquisition professionals anyway. It's starting to get into talent management more so than just the pure resourcing side of things. So it's curiosity, communication, and really getting intentional about, okay, let's mature the relationship we've got here.
100%. And Sarah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, because you are speaking to people, I suppose, that have been in talent teams, and you have done so for your career, and I'm sure you've met all of us at one stage and heard our stories. But in terms of that, Andrew touched on talent acquisition teams, I suppose, diversifying their role and the role that they play within HR and the role that they play within an organisation. Have you seen some examples of that you could share? So TA teams that maybe are quiet at the moment and a little bit nervous about, hey, are we really going to be recruiting a lot this year, and what does that mean to me?
And it's one of my bugbears that, as soon it's like, TA is a fair weather friend, right? When the market's crazy, TA goes nuts, big salary increase, it goes crazy, but then, we're not going to hire, so we'll just get rid of the TA team. I'm like, so the current market is, it's frustrating because we can see it all the time. And my first kind of call is like, diversify, get them working on all those things that they haven't had a chance to do in the last 12 months because they're so busy, just literally hiring and backfilling. So it's, it's the EVP. It might be like, it's just pipelining. So the thing is, at the moment, there's a plethora of candidates. I'm like, that's awesome. Like, I'd be thinking, my God, okay, I'm going to deploy my teams to actually do some really fantastic, talent pipelining, because I'm telling you, the market changes on a dime, and we could be in a completely different market in 6 months' time. And the reality, and to your point also, you need to, I think, as a recruiter, you need to always be respectful of the candidate. As I treat a candidate like a client, because there's no difference as far as I'm concerned, because the reality is tomorrow's client is today's candidate. And it's always that, you never know when you might hire these people that you're saying no to. So I know it's hard because the teams are stretched, but, you've got to be mindful of that candidate experience. And, whenever they walk away and go, okay, well, I didn't get that job with such and such, you want them to be an advocate and go, oh, well, they sound great. Maybe they'll have an opportunity 6 months down the track or whatever it is. And I know it's really, really hard to do, but I think it's so important. So, and it's hard when, TA are high, their job is to, literally kind of hire heads and all that kind of stuff. And we get that, but just businesses, just hold on, because some of the best teams that I've seen, and I saw this through the GFC when, there was just rapid cuts everywhere, but the organizations that actually held on to their TA teams were so incredibly successful because when that turn came, they were way ahead of the curve because they'd been focusing on developing grad programs, focusing on lateral stuff, looking at the internal pipeline and all these sorts of things. And they were just positioned, and you could just see, while the rest of the market was scrambling to go and, hire people, and it was just like, it was so obvious. So you definitely do see businesses, but again, I know it's just that foresight that sometimes, the CEO or whoever it is, the ELT will be like, oh, we're not hiring, so we don't need that. So look, that is, I hope by the time I retire, organisations can see that TA actually is not a wax and wane thing. Do you know what I mean? Because they should immediately go, okay, fantastic. We'll just get them working on with HR in terms of the more of these projects. But, and that's HR, the business, the CEOs need to come a bit this way, and TA probably needs to come a bit that way as well, and really demonstrate why they should be there. And I know, I'm no disrespect, I know it's not going to be a popular opinion, but you know what I mean? I think both parties need to really kind of come together and really show why they're, years ago it was HR was the first one out the door. Now no one would dare do that until, unless they were really, 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 really kind of, really desperate kind of thing.
Yeah, I think there's a whole, and I will set this up, I think there's a whole additional panel for this where we can pull some people together to give talent teams that advice to how do they get that diversification of skills? How do they actually, because I think that is the hardest part. I think, talent acquisition know their value, but they get caught on that hamster wheel because they're so busy. But it's then also reaching out to be able to say, hey, we want an opportunity to do this. And I know there are some really wonderful people in our industry that have done it really well. So we will pull that together and get some practical tips and advice for everyone out there as a follow-up session.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I've just realised we've been talking. We've only got another 5 minutes going, but I really I want to talk predictions for this market because there are. So I'll just pop up just a comment that came through there as well. I think that's a really important comment.
Spot on.
They can tackle during down. Absolutely. Exactly. And to keep track of that, and to make sure you don't lose, the sight of that when you are busy. Know what you really do want to achieve and continue to remind yourself. Hanoi, that's really great advice. So let's talk predictions. Where are we going to be in 6 months? Where are we going to be in 12 months? Don't hold any of us to account on our opinions. This is what our gut is telling us, and hopefully this will help you, in this moment in time which is a bit of a scary moment in time. But where do you see? Have you seen any trends, Sandy, or have you got any gut instincts in terms of where the market will be?
Look, I've been reading a bit lately, and some of the messaging from overseas, and some of like Josh Burton's, he did a whole recommendation piece recently on what's going to be happening. Look, I think there's more pain to come, sadly, until we get to a better place. I think a lot of the economic indicators and what I'm sort of seeing and hearing, retail sector, other sectors, the cost of living, mortgage stress, that the economy is going to be tightening, and my view is that by June 30, I think there's going to be more redundancies coming through as organizations kind of look to their new budgets and are predicting going into a more of a downturn. And I think that's going to be across, a lot of those more discretionary sectors. I think in areas like the health sector, aged care, there's nothing but growth and upside there in terms of careers and job opportunities. They're desperate for people. You've got the whole aging workforce, the aging population, demographics, health issues. The mental health space too is as a sector is going through a lot of growth. So those caring well-being sectors, definitely opportunities. But I think in some of those other sectors is going to be a bit of belt tightening in the market.
Absolutely. I think to Sarah's point, and Sarah, I'm sure you'll talk about it a bit more, so I won't go into too much detail, but there are opportunities out there, and there will be, even though there is going to be challenge, to Sandy's point, and there potentially may be more positions being made redundant, and there may be organisations. I mean, we just saw what's happening in the building sector. We see more and more building companies fold the impact that has on employees. But there are other sectors. So it is kind of shifting that mindset and looking elsewhere. But Sarah, I'm sure you'll talk some more to that. Sorry. But Andrew, what do you think? What are your predictions? Where do you think we'll be 6 months, 12 months? What are you seeing out there, or what are you feeling?
Oh, big question. I'd love to have a crystal ball. Look, I think and confidence is obviously underpinning all of that and what happens. In the wellbeing space, it'll continue to mature. It's probably still got a long way to go, become more sophisticated and actually targeted. Not just the simple things that we may think of wellbeing, but job design, for example. Just take that one example. That'll become more and more prominent, and it should be. We're looking at the 4-day work week. We're looking at remote working, and then I think that'll just evolve into, well, what's my job design? Because these rates of burnout are increasing, and the opposite of burnout's engagement.
Yeah.
So, we've got to move towards engagement if we want to fix that up. And so I think in terms of wellbeing, it will meet job design. At some point, I don't know when. I guess as these things evolve, they just take a little learning and reflecting and reiteration and so on. So I think that'll be one thing that we see in that space.
Yeah, and I think that's. I mean, it's another example of positive change that's happening at the moment. Bringing wellbeing to right to the forefront of how we actually design our workforce is an incredible, exciting change. It's not all around bums on seats 9 to 5. It's more around that engagement, that happiness, that well-being equals productivity. The example of the 4-day week and things like that we're seeing. I think there's, the landscape is moving in a positive direction. There are things out there for us to be excited about. So I love these examples, Andrew. That's awesome.
What I'd add to that too is you hear a lot about burnout. It's everywhere. It's all over LinkedIn. I would actually like us to start talking about engagement, more of it, which you don't really hear a lot about. You hear about the negative stuff.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. It's a very good point.
Yeah. What are your predictions, Sarah? What are you seeing in the you're doing your conversations? You're on the ground recruiting.
I'm on the ground. Yeah, don't hold me to it. Sometimes it feels like which way is the wind blowing? But look, and looking, in our role as recruiters, you're in a bit of a privileged position because we recruit right across the market. We can see what's happening and often ahead of time as well. So the growth, look, picking on tech, but the reality is the growth in tech has been phenomenal. And look, it's still, don't get me wrong, for every tech that's not doing well, there is one that's doing well. So look, tech is going to be the clear winner on any day. It is a massive growth sector. It invades our life. It just is the way it is, but it's looking for the sustainable tech. Do you know what I mean? So for example, even from the very early days, I'm like, cryptocurrency, payments, it's going to be, because crypto is not regulated, payments, it's related to consumer spending. So if we're not spending, then they're not going to do well. So you kind of got to look at, and, probably up until about, a couple of weeks ago, I was like, software as a service, license to print money, and then Xero and Atlassian came out and kind of cut. So I'm like, not so sure about that. But anyway, look, there's e-commerce, there's, technology is a big sector. So, don't get me wrong, there's still pockets of growth there. But by and large, the growth is coming, huge growth in sectors like infrastructure. So that's roads, tunnels, bridges. You can't go anywhere near Melbourne without seeing a, level crossing removal or a tunnel or a bridge. So, there's a lot in that space. We're a growing economy. We're going to overtake Sydney. We are growing. So, and that's going to be massive investment in infrastructure. So, there's that. There's also a lot in healthcare. And as, Sandy was saying, healthcare is a really broad sector. By the time you've got community health, you've got private hospital, public health, you've got mental health, you've got disability services, that's a huge growth sector. You've got aged care, retirement living, Bupa and Australian Unity are the biggest players in aged care sectors. So, you've got to think about that kind of more broadly. So huge growth in that space. Education, both from a primary, secondary, childcare gets in there as well, aged care, not aged care, higher education, the university sector's going through massive growth now that basically China said that students have to come back to site, so that's huge growth. Online education, there's a lot of growth. Look, sectors, I'm just trying to think, healthcare, logistics, transport, goes on and on and on. In terms of the sectors that I think will struggle, and I think you're right, Sandy, I think there will be a softening. There will definitely be a softening, heading into sort of, FY24, I think we're into. But the reality is you've also got to remember we've come off the back of rapid hiring. So, we're really, when we say a softening, we're actually just reverting to almost like 2019 levels. We've gone crazy. So even if we only go back to that level, I think you've got to take it with a grain of salt. Everyone's like, oh, but we almost had, literally 100% of the workforce employed. That's unheard of. You just don't get that. So that's very, very unusual. So what we're going back to is more of a kind of a stable. So, but look, I do think retail discretionary definitely will be a bit of a softening there, not grocery retail, but it's more like your JB Hi-Fi's, your Adairs, the ones that did really well out of the pandemic, Bunnings, etc. That's going to be a softer. Banking, fin services, that is kind of, there's pockets. Some are doing really well and some are not so well. So a little bit on that side. Look, prof services seems to be softening, and again, they make a lot of money off, M&A, tech activity, all that type of thing. So you can see the pockets of where it's going to be busy and not. It's always tied to what's happening in the economy. But look, at the end of the day, the market goes like this. We have this conversation, and then in 3 months' time, it could be completely different. But just, there's still work out there, 100%. Sometimes it just takes time. Timing is everything, is what I would say.
100%. Look, Sandy, Andrew, and Sarah, that was amazing today. I think we could have a follow-up session. I think we could go for a few more hours, but I hope everyone out there has taken away some advice and received some support. Remember, actually, I'll get you guys to call out your websites in case I get the links wrong. But do remember on Rubberband, you'll find the details of Career Money Life and also the Candidate Care platform, which is available to you, and it is free of charge. So please go in there. There's a lot that you can explore that will help you, whether it is from how to write a CV, or whether it's from coaching, or the whole kit and caboodle to help you. Sandy, it's careermoneylife.com for yourself. Is that right?
That's right. Thank you.
Excellent. Andrew, let me guess, dresswell.com.au?
You got it.
Excellent. And Sarah, Samuels Donegan.
.com.au.
We're all .com.au. Thank you so much, everyone that's popped comments up there. And absolute pleasure. We're so glad to have caught up with you today. I'm so glad you've all enjoyed it. So look forward to catching up again soon. Most importantly, look after yourselves and look after each other.
Exactly.
We don't know what's around the corner. Could be good news, could be not so good news, could be a combo of both. The most important is that we look after ourselves and each other. But thank you, everyone. Great to see you today.
Thank you, Eden.
Everyone. Bye.